We need to turn hard to port now, before that wave hits us. Are you certain that's our only option?
This view represents the standard we must maintain. The projections show growth, but we need to secure the waterfront deal now.
Turn this yacht around now, or you will regret it before midnight. The words left Naomi Carter's mouth so suddenly that several guests stopped talking and turned toward her. For a brief moment, only the sound of the ocean remained. The luxury yacht drifted across the deep blue waters off the Florida coast beneath a sky that still appeared calm to most people on board. Crystal glasses sparkled under golden deck lights. Soft music floated through the evening air. Wealthy investors laughed around polished tables covered with expensive food and champagne. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked safe. Richard Bennett lifted his glass and stared at the black waitress standing beside him. Then he laughed. The sound was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You are a waitress," he said with a grin. "Not a weather expert." Several guests chuckled immediately. Others smiled awkwardly. Naomi felt dozens of eyes settle on her. She could have walked away. She could have remained silent. Instead, she looked toward the western horizon again. The dark line she had noticed 30 minutes earlier had grown wider. The clouds were moving differently now. The wind carried a strange sharpness that reminded her of childhood mornings on the Gulf Coast. "Sir," she said calmly, "the weather is changing faster than it should. We need to head back toward shore." Richard raised an eyebrow. "According to who?" More laughter followed. Naomi remained composed. "According to the ocean." The answer only made the guests laugh harder. Richard took a sip of champagne and shook his head. "I have meteorologists, satellite systems, and a captain with 30 years of experience. I think we will survive one pleasant evening cruise." The crowd relaxed again. Conversations resumed. Music continued. Yet Naomi could not ignore what she was seeing. She had spent her childhood learning lessons most people never learned. Her father had been a fisherman his entire life. Before she could read books, he taught her how to read the water. Before she could drive a car, he taught her how to watch clouds. He used to say that the ocean always speaks first. The problem is that most people never listen. Naomi moved toward the railing and stared across the water. The color of the sea had changed slightly. The surface looked darker than it had an hour earlier. Small waves moved against the natural pattern she expected. Above them, distant clouds seemed to rise higher with every passing minute. Behind her, Richard continued entertaining his guests. He stood at the center of attention exactly where he liked to be. Wealthy donors listened to every word he said. Investors laughed at every joke. Nobody noticed the wind becoming stronger. Nobody noticed the crew exchanging increasingly concerned glances near the bridge. Naomi folded her hands and took a slow breath. Deep inside, an uneasy feeling continued growing. She did not want to be right. She hoped she was wrong. But the signs around her looked familiar. Too familiar. As another cool gust crossed the deck, she glanced toward the horizon one more time. The dark wall of clouds seemed closer now. Much closer. And while the billionaire enjoyed the admiration of everyone around him, Naomi could not shake the feeling that the ocean was about to teach everyone on board a lesson they would never forget. Naomi Carter had learned long ago that the ocean rarely shouted first. It whispered. It hinted. It offered warnings to anyone patient enough to notice them. As the yacht continued farther from shore, she moved quietly between guests carrying trays of drinks while her attention remained fixed on the sea. Around her, laughter drifted across the deck. Expensive watches flashed beneath decorative lights. Conversations about investments, luxury properties, and private islands filled the warm evening air. To everyone else, the voyage felt like a celebration. To Naomi, it felt like the beginning of a mistake. She paused briefly near the railing and watched the horizon. The clouds had changed shape again. Tall columns of dark gray now climbed into the fading sky. The wind no longer arrived in gentle bursts. It came in steady currents that carried a damp heaviness she recognized immediately. The smell of rain lingered beneath the scent of salt water. A memory surfaced from years earlier. She was 10 years old, standing beside her father on a small fishing boat along the Florida coast. The sea had looked calm that morning, too. Other boats continued working. Tourists filled the beaches. Yet her father had turned the boat around without hesitation. Hours later, a severe storm struck the area. Naomi never forgot the lesson. The ocean often looked safest right before conditions changed. She returned to her duties, but concern continued building inside her. Near the bow, several crew members exchanged brief glances while reviewing weather data on a tablet. One of them looked toward the horizon and frowned. Naomi noticed immediately. Experienced people rarely ignored warning signs. A few minutes later, she entered the service area below deck to collect fresh supplies. Through a small window, she could see the water more clearly. The color had deepened from bright blue to a darker steel shade. Tiny ripples moved across the surface in conflicting directions. Her father used to call that confused water. Whenever it appeared unexpectedly, he paid attention. Naomi placed several glasses onto a tray and took a slow breath. She knew what most people thought of her. To the guests, she was simply another member of the service staff. They saw the uniform before they saw the person wearing it. They did not know she had spent nearly every childhood summer on fishing boats. They did not know she could identify changing weather patterns faster than many forecasting applications. They certainly did not know that every instinct she possessed was telling her the same thing. The situation was becoming dangerous. When she returned to the upper deck, Richard Bennett stood near the center of the gathering, entertaining a group of investors. The billionaire appeared completely relaxed. He spoke confidently about future business ventures while guests listened with admiration. Naomi watched him for a moment. She did not dislike him. In truth, she felt something closer to frustration. He seemed so certain that money, technology, and expertise could solve every problem. Yet nature did not care about wealth. The sea did not care about status. Another gust swept across the yacht, stronger than the last. Several guests reached for jackets. Decorative napkins fluttered across tables. Far in the distance, a flash of light briefly illuminated the clouds. Most people never noticed it. Naomi did. Her eyes narrowed toward the horizon. The storm was no longer a possibility. It was coming. And with every passing minute, the yacht continued moving directly toward it. The first raindrop fell so lightly that almost nobody noticed it. It landed on the polished wooden railing and disappeared into the darkness. Then another followed. And another. Naomi Carter stood near the service station at the edge of the upper deck, watching the horizon with growing concern. The wall of clouds she had been tracking for nearly 2 hours now stretched across the western sky like a dark curtain. The last traces of sunset had vanished behind it. Around her, however, the party continued. Music drifted through the air. Guests raised glasses. Laughter echoed across the yacht, as if the ocean itself had no voice. Naomi picked up a tray and moved through the crowd, but her attention remained fixed on the changing conditions around them. The wind had shifted again. It no longer came from a steady direction. Instead, sudden gusts arrived unpredictably, causing table decorations to tremble and loose napkins to slide across polished surfaces. Near the bow, 2 crew members adjusted equipment while exchanging worried looks. Naomi noticed because she had spent years learning how experienced sailors communicated without words. Concern often appeared long before anyone admitted it aloud. She stopped beside a service counter and glanced toward a digital weather display mounted near the bridge entrance. The forecast still showed only moderate conditions. Yet the ocean outside told a different story. That contradiction troubled her more than anything. Technology was useful, but nature did not always follow predictions. As she turned back toward the guests, she spotted Richard Bennett speaking to a group of investors beneath a canopy of decorative lights. The billionaire appeared completely unbothered by the weather. He smiled confidently while discussing future business ventures and luxury developments. The people around him listened with admiration. Naomi wondered what it must feel like to move through life with that much certainty. Then she remembered her father's words. Confidence becomes dangerous when it prevents people from listening. A sudden vibration beneath her feet interrupted her thoughts. It was subtle but noticeable. The yacht adjusted its course slightly. Several guests paused and looked around before quickly returning to their conversations. Naomi walked toward the starboard side and looked over the water. The sea had become restless. Small waves crossed each other in uneven patterns. White foam appeared where there had been none earlier. Far above, the clouds continued climbing higher into the night sky. Then she saw something that made her stomach tighten. A distant flash illuminated the horizon. Seconds later, another appeared farther north. Lightning. Not close enough to alarm most people, but close enough for her. Naomi set down her tray and made a decision. Remaining silent no longer felt responsible. She approached one of the senior crew members near the bridge. "The weather is deteriorating faster than expected," she said quietly. The man looked toward the horizon before returning his gaze to her. His expression revealed that he had noticed it too. "We are monitoring it," he replied. Naomi nodded respectfully, but the answer did not ease her concern. Monitoring and acting were not the same thing. As she stepped away, another gust swept across the deck, noticeably stronger than before. Several guests reached for jackets. Glasses rattled softly on nearby tables. The music continued, but something had changed. Even the atmosphere of the party felt less comfortable now. Richard remained at the center of attention, unaware that the ocean was steadily rewriting the evening's plans. Naomi looked toward the dark horizon once more. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The only question left was whether anyone would realize it before the sea demanded their attention itself. The first sign that people could no longer ignore the weather came when the music suddenly cut out for several seconds. Conversations paused across the deck. Guests looked toward the speakers as technicians hurried to restore the sound system. A moment later, the music returned, and nervous laughter spread through the crowd. Most people treated it as a minor inconvenience. Naomi Carter did not. She knew that isolated technical problems often appeared when larger problems were beginning. The wind swept across the yacht again, stronger than before. Decorative lights hanging above the upper deck swayed noticeably. Several guests stepped closer to the interior lounge area. The carefree atmosphere that had defined the evening was slowly fading. Naomi carried a tray toward the service station, but her attention remained fixed on the horizon. The storm clouds now covered nearly half the sky. Occasional flashes illuminated their towering shapes from within. She could no longer see a clear path back toward the distant shoreline. A knot of concern tightened in her chest. She knew she had to try again. Near the center of the deck, Richard Bennett stood with several investors discussing a new waterfront development project. His confidence seemed untouched by the changing conditions around him. Naomi approached carefully. "Mr. Bennett," she said. He looked at her with visible irritation, recognizing her immediately. "What is it now?" Naomi kept her voice calm. "The weather is getting worse much faster than expected. We should seriously consider heading back toward shore." One of the investors glanced toward the dark horizon. Another looked uncomfortable. Richard simply smiled. "And you know this because you spent years studying meteorology?" A few people chuckled. Naomi ignored them. "No, sir. I know this because I grew up on the water. The signs are all around us." Richard shook his head. "The captain has access to professional forecasts. The yacht has advanced navigation systems. We are not relying on guesses." Naomi felt heat rise in her face, but refused to argue. "I am not guessing." Richard's expression hardened. "Then perhaps you should focus on serving guests and leave navigation to professionals." The words landed heavily. Several people looked away. Others pretended not to hear. Naomi stood silently for a moment before nodding once. "Yes, sir." She turned and walked away while quiet laughter followed behind her. Yet even as she moved back toward the service area, something unexpected happened. One of the crew members approached her. He lowered his voice. "I heard what you said." Naomi looked at him, and the man glanced toward the horizon. "I do not think you are completely wrong." Before she could respond, a voice called him away. He hurried toward the bridge, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts. Minutes later, another powerful gust swept across the deck. This time, several champagne glasses tipped over. Guests grabbed tablecloths before they could blow away. Far ahead of the yacht, lightning flashed again, brighter than before. The sea beneath the vessel seemed darker with every passing minute. Naomi looked toward the bridge windows. Crew members moved quickly between instruments. Their pace alone told her everything she needed to know. The people responsible for the yacht were becoming concerned. The problem was that concern had arrived too late. As the vessel continued deeper into open water, Naomi stared into the darkness ahead. The storm no longer felt distant. It felt close enough to touch. And somewhere beyond the growing wall of clouds, the ocean was preparing to prove that it had been warning them all along. The transformation happened so gradually that many guests did not realize how much the situation had changed until it was impossible to ignore. The yacht was no longer gliding smoothly across calm water. A constant rolling motion now moved beneath everyone's feet. Conversations became shorter. Laughter became less frequent. Guests who had spent hours enjoying the open-air deck slowly drifted toward enclosed areas of the vessel. Naomi Carter stood near the service entrance watching the ocean with growing concern. The sea had turned dark gray beneath the storm clouds overhead. Wind pushed across the water in long, powerful currents, leaving streaks of white foam in every direction. The horizon had vanished completely behind a wall of rain and darkness. Another flash illuminated the clouds. This time several guests noticed. A few looked toward the bridge. Others reached for their phones to check weather reports. Naomi did not need an application to tell her what was happening. The ocean had already delivered its answer. A sudden burst of wind swept across the upper deck. Decorative banners snapped sharply. Empty glasses rattled against tables. One of the crew members hurried across the deck, securing loose equipment. The change in his expression caught Naomi's attention immediately. Earlier, the crew had seemed cautious. Now they looked worried. Near the center of the gathering, Richard Bennett continued attempting to reassure his guests. "A little weather is nothing to worry about," he said with a confident smile. "This yacht was built to handle far worse." Several people nodded, grateful for reassurance. Others appeared less convinced. As if responding directly to his words, the yacht shifted noticeably beneath them. A few guests reached for nearby railings to steady themselves. The music stopped again. This time it did not immediately return. Silence settled across the deck except for the growing sound of wind and waves. Naomi looked toward the bridge windows. Crew members moved rapidly between instruments and communication systems. One officer spoke urgently into a radio. Another stared at a monitor with visible concern. Then something happened that sent a chill through Naomi. The navigation display visible through the glass flickered briefly before going dark. It came back seconds later, but the reaction among the crew told her everything. Equipment problems had begun. Moments later, the captain himself stepped onto the deck. His calm expression could not completely hide the tension in his eyes. Guests immediately sensed it. Conversation stopped. Richard approached him. "Is there a problem?" The captain hesitated before answering. "We are experiencing some interference with our navigation systems due to the weather. We are evaluating the situation." The words were professional. The meaning was not comforting. A nervous murmur spread through the crowd. Naomi watched Richard carefully. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared on his face. Only for a second, but it was there. Then another powerful roll moved through the yacht. Several guests grabbed tables and railings. Far ahead, the darkness seemed to swallow the sea itself. Rain now appeared in the distance like a moving curtain crossing the water. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Her father's voice echoed through memory. When the ocean stops giving warnings, it starts giving consequences. She opened her eyes and looked toward the bridge once more. The storm had arrived. The equipment was struggling. The crew was concerned. The guests were frightened. And somewhere inside the growing tension, a realization slowly began spreading through the yacht. The waitress everyone laughed at might have understood what was happening long before anyone else. For the first time that evening, Naomi Carter stopped moving. The trays, the guests, the conversations, and the responsibilities of her job faded into the background as she stood near a side corridor and listened to the storm surrounding the yacht. Rain tapped softly against the windows now. Wind moved across the vessel with a low, steady howl. Beyond the glass, the ocean had become a dark and shifting world illuminated only by occasional flashes hidden within distant clouds. The celebration was gone. In its place lingered uncertainty. Guests had moved indoors. Crew members walked quickly through hallways carrying radios and checking equipment. Somewhere above, the captain and officers continued working through the growing challenges. Naomi leaned lightly against a wall and closed her eyes for a moment. She knew panic would help nobody. Fear often made people stop seeing clearly. Her father taught her that too. When she was young, she used to ask him how he remained calm during rough weather. His answer never changed. The ocean is strongest when people forget how to listen. She could almost hear his voice now. Years earlier, before sunrise on a quiet Florida morning, he had stood beside her on a small fishing boat and pointed toward the horizon. The water had looked peaceful. The sky had been clear. Yet he turned the boat around anyway. Hours later, a severe storm struck the coast. Naomi remembered asking how he knew. He smiled and told her that nature leaves clues everywhere. The trick is learning which clues matter. A sudden movement beneath her feet pulled her back to the present. The yacht rolled again, longer this time. Not violent, not dangerous, but different. The vessel felt less certain beneath the water. Naomi opened her eyes and looked through a nearby window. Rain now blurred the glass. The sea beyond had disappeared into darkness. For a moment, she simply watched the water. Then she noticed something familiar. Even through the rain, the wave patterns told a story. The wind was pushing from one direction, while the swell beneath the surface moved from another. Her father would have noticed immediately. That combination rarely lasted long before conditions became more difficult. Nearby, several guests sat quietly in the lounge area. Earlier, they had spoken loudly about business deals and luxury vacations. Now many stared at weather updates on their phones. Others looked toward the windows with concern. The storm had stripped away the illusion of control that wealth sometimes creates. Out on the water, everyone answered to the same ocean. Naomi took a slow breath. She felt no satisfaction in being right. She wished the evening had unfolded differently. She wished Richard Bennett had listened hours ago. She wished the yacht had already turned back toward shore. But wishing changed nothing. Reality was here now. Through the corridor, she spotted crew members speaking urgently near the bridge entrance. Their expressions were serious. Their pace was faster than before. Yet what caught Naomi's attention most was not their concern. It was their uncertainty. They were searching for answers. Outside, another flash illuminated the storm clouds for a brief second. The light reflected across the water and vanished. Naomi stared into the darkness beyond the glass. The lessons her father taught her were no longer memories. They were becoming important. Somewhere ahead, the ocean was preparing its next test. And deep inside, Naomi felt the unmistakable certainty that before this night ended, people would finally understand why she tried so hard to warn them. The moment everything changed began with a single alarm. A sharp tone echoed through the yacht, cutting through the sound of rain and conversation. Every head turned toward the ceiling. Guests looked at one another with confusion. Crew members immediately moved with greater urgency. Naomi Carter pushed away from the wall and stepped into the corridor. She did not need anyone to explain that something important had happened. The expressions on the faces around her said enough. The yacht rolled again beneath the water, and this time the movement felt different. Less controlled, less predictable. Near the bridge entrance, officers gathered around several displays while speaking rapidly into communication devices. Through the glass, Naomi caught sight of flashing warning indicators. A crew member hurried past carrying navigation charts. Another disappeared into a nearby equipment room. The uncertainty she had sensed earlier was now visible to everyone. Richard Bennett emerged from the main lounge and approached the bridge with several concerned guests following behind him. The confidence that had defined him throughout the evening had begun to fade. "What is happening?" he asked one of the officers. The man hesitated before answering. "We are experiencing intermittent failures in our navigation systems due to the storm conditions." The hallway fell silent. Richard frowned. "You mean temporary disruptions?" The officer glanced toward the bridge before replying. "We are still assessing the situation." Naomi watched carefully. The answer was polite, but it revealed more than the officer intended. Nobody spoke that way when everything was under control. A few moments later, the captain stepped into the corridor. Rainwater glistened across his jacket. His expression was calm, but tension surrounded him like a shadow. "Everyone should remain inside until further notice," he said. "The crew is working through the weather conditions." Guests nodded, though fear had begun appearing in their eyes. Outside the windows, darkness covered the sea completely. Rain streaked across the glass. Wind pushed against the yacht in long, powerful bursts. Naomi stared at the water. Even through the storm, she could still read the patterns her father taught her to observe. The waves were no longer arriving consistently. Swells crossed one another from different directions. The vessel was entering an unstable area. Suddenly, a crew member from earlier approached her. The same man who had admitted she might be right. "Naomi," he said quietly, "the captain wants to speak with you." She blinked in surprise. "Me?" He nodded. Minutes later, Naomi stepped inside the bridge. Screens glowed across the room. Officers studied charts and weather data. Through the front windows, visibility had been reduced to darkness, rain, and moving water. The captain turned toward her. "I heard about your concerns earlier," he said. "Tell me exactly what you noticed." Naomi looked through the glass. Then she pointed toward the water beyond the bow. She explained the changing wind directions, the wave patterns, the cloud formations, and the unusual color shifts she observed before sunset. The room became very quiet. Several officers exchanged looks. One of them slowly nodded. That matches some of what we are seeing now. The captain studied her carefully. Then he turned toward his team. New discussions began immediately. Richard stood nearby, listening to every word. The billionaire who laughed at her hours earlier now watched in complete silence. For the first time that night, nobody cared that Naomi was a waitress. Nobody cared about titles, wealth, or social status. The storm had stripped all of that away. Only knowledge mattered now. And as the yacht continued moving through the darkness, Richard Bennett realized something that made his stomach sink. The woman he publicly dismissed might be the only person on board who understood what the ocean was trying to say. The atmosphere on the bridge changed completely after Naomi Carter finished explaining what she had observed. Nobody smiled. Nobody questioned her experience. Every person in the room focused on the ocean beyond the glass and the information unfolding before them. The captain listened carefully as officers compared her observations with the limited data still available through the yacht's systems. Several indicators now pointed toward the same conclusion. The storm was stronger than originally predicted, and the vessel had moved into a more dangerous area than anyone intended. Naomi stood quietly near the back of the bridge. She did not enjoy being proven right. She wished the warning had never been necessary. Yet as the rain continued striking the windows, she understood that wishing no longer mattered. Decisions did. Outside, visibility continued deteriorating. The sea seemed to disappear into darkness between flashes of distant light. Wind pressed steadily against the yacht. The vessel remained stable, but the uncertainty surrounding its position had become the greatest concern. One navigation display remained unreliable. Communication signals faded in and out. Crew members relied increasingly on experience rather than technology. Richard Bennett watched everything unfold in silence. Hours earlier, he had laughed at the idea that a waitress could understand something his experts overlooked. Now he stood among those experts while they listened closely to every word she spoke. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Eventually, the captain approached Naomi again. "If you were in my position," he asked, "what would you be watching right now?" Several officers turned toward her. Naomi looked through the glass, toward the water. For a few seconds she said nothing. Then she pointed toward the movement of the waves. "The wind is pushing one direction, but the larger swells beneath the surface are moving another. That tells me conditions are changing farther out than what we can see." She paused briefly. "If we continue following only the damaged navigation guidance, we risk moving deeper into the unstable water." The captain nodded slowly. One officer adjusted a chart. Another began comparing wave patterns with local coastal data. For the first time in hours, a clearer plan began taking shape. Richard stepped closer. His expression looked completely different now. The confidence that once bordered on arrogance had disappeared. In its place stood humility. "Naomi," he said quietly. She turned toward him. For a moment, he seemed unsure how to continue. Then he lowered his eyes. "I should have listened to you." The bridge became silent. No one expected the billionaire to say those words. Richard looked toward the storm outside before continuing. "I dismissed you because of your job. I assumed experience only mattered when it came from people I considered important." He shook his head slightly. "I was wrong." Naomi studied him for a moment. She could hear the sincerity in his voice. The ocean had taught him something wealth never could. "What matters now is getting everyone home safely," she replied. Richard nodded. "And because of you, we have a better chance of doing that." The captain soon issued updated instructions based on the information available. Crew members moved with renewed confidence. The atmosphere remained tense, but it was no longer directionless. Purpose had returned. Hours passed slowly as the yacht adjusted course and worked through the storm. Then, sometime after midnight, the rain began weakening. The wind softened. Visibility gradually improved. Through the darkness ahead, faint lights appeared on the horizon. Shoreline lights. A quiet wave of relief spread through the bridge. No cheering followed. No celebration erupted. The moment felt too meaningful for that. Instead, people simply stared toward the distant lights. Richard stood beside Naomi, watching them grow brighter. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. The lesson had already been delivered. The The woman everyone underestimated had become the person everyone trusted. And in the quiet space between the storm and the shore, Richard Bennett finally understood the value of a voice he should have respected from the beginning. By the time the yacht finally approached the coastline, the storm had already begun retreating into the darkness behind them. The rain had faded to a light mist. The wind no longer howled across the decks. Instead, only the steady sound of water against the hull remained. After hours of tension, uncertainty, and fear, the distant lights of Florida now stretched across the horizon like a promise fulfilled. Naomi Carter stood quietly near the outer deck, watching the shoreline grow clearer with every passing minute. The ocean that had seemed so threatening earlier now appeared calm beneath the fading clouds. Above, a few stars had begun reappearing between breaks in the sky. The transformation felt almost unreal. Guests slowly emerged from the interior lounges. Their conversations were quieter than before. The confidence and excitement that filled the evening had been replaced by reflection. Some stared silently toward land. Others thanked crew members as they passed. Everyone seemed to understand that the night could have unfolded very differently. Near the bridge, officers continued monitoring the final approach. Their expressions were noticeably more relaxed now. The worst had passed. Technology was functioning again. Communication systems had stabilized. Yet despite all the equipment surrounding them, many members of the crew occasionally glanced toward Naomi with quiet respect. They knew how much her observations had helped when answers were difficult to find. Richard Bennett stepped onto the deck and paused several feet away from her. For a moment, he simply looked toward the shoreline. The billionaire who had commanded every room he entered now seemed unusually thoughtful. The storm had taken something from him and given something back at the same time. It had taken certainty. It had given perspective. My father used to tell me that success meant always having the right answers, he said quietly. Naomi looked toward him. And now? Richard smiled faintly. Now I think success might begin with listening when someone else has them. Naomi returned her gaze to the horizon. The first hints of dawn were beginning to appear beyond the coastline. A pale silver light touched the edge of the sky. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence felt comfortable, honest. Richard finally turned toward her. You warned me more than once. Naomi nodded. I did. And I laughed. She did not answer immediately. Eventually, she offered a small smile. The important part is that you listened before it was too late. Richard lowered his eyes briefly. Then he extended his hand. Not as a billionaire acknowledging an employee. Not as a powerful man rewarding someone beneath him. Simply as one person offering respect to another. Naomi shook his hand. Nothing more needed to be said. As the yacht entered the harbor, the first rays of sunlight spread across the water. Golden reflections danced across the surface of the sea. The same ocean that had carried warnings, fear, and uncertainty through the night now appeared peaceful once again. Crew members prepared docking procedures. Guests gathered their belongings. Life slowly returned to normal. Yet Naomi knew something had changed. Not only for Richard, for many people aboard. They had witnessed a simple truth that wealth could not purchase and status could not guarantee. Wisdom does not belong to titles. Character does not depend on position. And sometimes the person standing quietly in the background sees what everyone else misses. Naomi remained on deck as the yacht settled gently into port. Around her, morning light filled the harbor. Seagulls drifted above the water. The storm was gone. The laughter, the mockery, and the doubt were gone as well. Only the sunrise remained. And as Naomi watched the golden light spread across the calm sea, she felt something deeper than victory. She felt peace. The ocean had spoken, and at last, people had listened.
If we hold this course, the troughs will align with our resonant frequency. We must adjust speed now to stabilize the vessel before the next swell hits.